Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jenny and I'm here today to wrap up my Fresh Reads project from 2025. So just to recap, I decided at the end of 2024 that I really didn't read enough new releases. And I wanted to try to find a way to integrate more new releases into my reading. And so I created this Fresh Reads project where I was actively selecting 2025 releases into a list and also keeping track of things like book prizes and different things like that happening throughout the year that I could use to help me find newer books, fresher reads to work into my TBR. The other thing I did was I allowed myself a 3-year gap. So I included 2023 and 2024 releases into this category as well, because what tends to happen with me is that I'll see a book, especially if I'm adding it to my library list, I will see that there's tons of holds on it and I don't want to wait in line for a long time to get the book, so I will put it on my for later shelf and then eventually I'll get to it. But this could be a lot of the time years later, and I really wanted to make a concerted effort to read these books sooner and to include them onto this list. So I've got a whole bunch of stats for you. I've got some impressions for you, and I guess I'll start with my overall impressions of the project. I think for me, this worked really well. It was at times a little bit stressful because I was waiting for books and didn't get them and I had to substitute books in, but giving myself the flexibility of doing that with 2024 and 2023 releases was really helpful. And I think what it helped me to do was to just be more aware of the way I was structuring my TBRs. So not just always going from backlist, but really like wanting to integrate these books in helped me to read more. So right now it's nearing the end of December and I read about 75 books a year. I am nearing that number right now, but it looks like I might not make it this year. We'll see how the next 2 weeks, just under 2 weeks, I think 10 days, pan out for me. But out of, I think at this point I've read 69 books. Out of those 69, 16 of the books that I read were from this Fresh Reads category. So I feel like that's a good number for me. And out of those, 4 of the books were nonfiction and the other 12 were fiction. And I created 10 reading vlogs from these books. So I didn't make a reading vlog for every single book. Some of them integrated into other videos and some of them just weren't working out to be vlogging material. So I'm really happy with that. I think 10 reading vlogs for me is probably more than I've ever made in a year. And it was a fun experiment to see what it was like to make a reading vlog each month along with a studio vlog and a reading wrap up and whatever other videos I was able to produce. So I think that will be something that I'll try to carry forward as well in the rest of the year or in a coming year, is to integrate more reading vlogs into my video schedule. Okay. So in terms of the breakdown of the years, I read 4 books from 2023, 4 books that were published in 2024, and 9 books that were published in 2025. I had 4 5 stars, 6 4 stars, and 6 3 stars, and 1 DNF. So I feel like that was pretty good. And I will say, I tend to be fairly generous around giving out 3 stars. For me, 3 stars can mean I liked it and it was almost a 4, or I really didn't like it and would have given it a 2. But I feel a lot of the time that, especially if it's a book from, a certain, perspective, that is one that is very far away from my own, I'm not comfortable giving books less than 3 stars if I don't like them, because sometimes that is based on my own personal reading preference and it's not really the fault of the book. And so in that way, 3 stars is a very fluid number for me, and it really depends on which book it is, whether it's, something that I did like but just didn't like enough to give a 4-star to, or I really didn't like it, it really wasn't for me, but I could see the merit of it and gave it 3 stars. So yeah, like I said, it's very rare that I give a book less than 3 stars when I'm rating them, and I don't rate all books. I did not rate the book that I DNF'd. I don't think that's fair. If I would have read the whole thing and I didn't like it, then I would have given it a rating accordingly, but I don't rate books if I DNF them. I just don't see how that's helpful for anyone. At the beginning of the year, I chose a list of 6 books based on a whole bunch of new release videos that came out at the beginning of 2025, based on books that I thought, like I saw other booktubers talking about, that I thought I might like. And so from that list, I ended up reading 4. The reason I didn't read one of the books is because it was a World War II set book, and I'd already read a World War II book set. Actually, I think I read more than one already this year, and I have to really space those out because World War II is written about a lot, and I can only read so many of those per year before I feel oversaturated with the topic, so I didn't read that one for that reason. And the other one, I just ran out of time, and it wasn't something that kind of compelled me to pick it up, so I just didn't, in the end, pick that one up. So I thought I would give you a ranking of the books in my order of preference of how I liked them. So I'll start with the nonfiction because there's only 4 books in that one. So 2 of the books on this list were from the Women's Prize for Nonfiction list. And the first one is 1,000 Threads by Neneh Cherry. So I put this one in number 4. All of these books were books that I enjoyed. But in terms of the overall, feeling about the books and like how people liked them or didn't like them, for me, it was a very, I don't want to say basic because that makes it sound like it's not good. It was a very interesting memoir about Neneh Cherry's life, and she had really lovely relationships with her parents and with siblings and friends, and she talked a lot about those things, her creative relationships as well. So I found the book very good, and I gave it 4 stars, and it was worth the read, and I'm glad I read it. The next book was Rebel Girl by Kathleen Hanna. And this is another musical memoir. Kathleen Hanna was part of the Riot Girl movement. Again, a musician sharing their life story. I would say that Neneh Cherry's memoir was more chronological, was more akin to an autobiography because there was more information throughout. I would say Rebel Girl is a little bit more anecdotal, a little bit more story-based. She did tell the story of her life, but she very much related it to specific moments and vignettes in her life, and then would go back and forth within those. So it was told with a bit more of a less of a focus on, all the details, and more of a focus on, pivotal moments or moments that really formed the person that she was. Again, I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was good. I'm glad I read it. But again, I didn't see anything in either of these memoirs that was something like, really life-changing or that impacted me in terms of the way some memoirs can when you really connect with the person and the life that they've had. The next was By the Fire We Carry by Rebecca Noble. And this book is Rebecca Nable. This book was an overview of a court case that happened in Oklahoma around Indigenous rights to land. It was, I think, a very important book. By the way, I'm going to link all of the reading blogs down below. So if you're interested in any of these books, you can go and check out the reading blogs because I talk in way more detail about them there. But to me, this book was really worthy of being on the Women's Prize for Nonfiction list because of the important topic that it was covering. I think that unfortunately, books about these types of issues, land issues, Indigenous rights, are not promoted enough. They're not spread widely enough across general reading, reading atmosphere or however you want to say it. They're not just out in the world enough to me, and they need to be more recognized and brought to the forefront. It's one thing to read a celebrity's memoir. It's another thing to understand, our society, how it's structured, and the real huge importance of land justice and justice for Indigenous peoples. So for me, this was very helpful because I have read less about Native American rights than I have about Indigenous Canadian rights. And so this was an important read for me, and I think for a lot of people. And my number one fiction read out of this list of fresh reads was Monsters, A Fan's Dilemma by Claire Dederer. So I am still in the process of, or will be in the process of, filming a video that goes into more depth about this book in comparison to another book I read for the Fresh Reads Project, Theory and Practice by Michelle de Kretser. And I've related those two books together, but I still just haven't gotten to that video. So this book is about it's about cancel culture. It's about the artists who create work that we love, but have very problematic value systems or problematic actions, things that make us stop loving their art as much. And it's the dilemma of that. It's the dilemma of liking the art, but not liking the artist. And how do we reconcile that within ourselves as fans? And I thought it was brilliantly done. It really made me think about a lot of things. And I really appreciate those conversations being, again, brought to the forefront. To me, good nonfiction is about conversations that need to be happening in the world and dialogue around these issues. Everything becomes very black and white online. Everything becomes very yes or no. They're either good or bad, and that's really not realistic. People have layers. People have good and bad things mixed up within them. We have to be able to dialogue and look at individuals and their actions, and create a society where we can see value in something while also understanding that the person who may have created this thing of value is problematic. And how do we negotiate that as a society? And that's a really important discussion. So I'm really, really glad that I read that book. Okay, so in terms of my fiction reading, I have to start at the bottom, and that was my most recent vlog, which was Flashlight by Susan Choi, which I DNF'd. Unfortunately, this book, despite making it to the Booker shortlist, was not a book that I was able to get through. And that is a very rare thing for me. I DNF very few books in a year. But I think one of the reasons, if I would have been reading this earlier in the year, it's highly likely that I would have finished it. Once I got to a certain point this year where I struggled a lot in November with getting reading in, and I realized that I was running out of time to hit my reading goal, I made a much more quick decision to DNF that book because I didn't want to waste time reading it when I knew I really didn't like it. I think if I would have been reading it in February or March, I probably would have finished it. So I don't think I would have liked it any better. I mean, obviously, I can't say that for sure because I didn't finish the book, but ultimately, it wasn't for me. The next one that I put down here was The New Internationals by David Wright. So this was a historical fiction set in Paris post-World War II. And there were a lot of things I did like about this book in the beginning. And then as I read on, I just started to like it less and less. It just kind of fell apart for me. There was a lack of cohesion in the story, in the characters, in their development. It follows a few central characters. They're all young people. They're all trying to figure out who they are in the context of a post-World War II Paris, having been children during the war itself. They're coming of age. They're trying to figure out where they fit in the world. So it was successful in a lot of ways as a coming of age story, but just not successful enough for me to have really put it high up on my list. The next one after that is The Rules of Fortune by Danielle Prescod. This was a more contemporary novel. It was about a Black family who the father has become a billionaire, and it was about the things that he did in his life to achieve that success and how that relates to his way of moving in society. And I thought that a lot of the things that were brought up in the story were very valid and interesting, but ultimately there was a lack of a real discussion around the ethics involved. It ended up devolving into a kind of, I don't know, I don't think soap opera is the right word, but it ended up resolving itself in a very like TV, we need to wrap up this episode, so everybody's gonna, work out in the end, and not really go into the issues. And I thought it could have been a much more powerful novel if it actually talked more about those issues and didn't just gloss them over at the end, so that there was kind of a happy ending for everybody. And next was Cold by Drew Hayden Taylor. Drew Hayden Taylor is an Indigenous author, a playwright and novelist, and this book was set in Toronto and was exploring the Indigenous legend of the Wendigo, which is a monster. There were multiple Indigenous characters, and I really liked, that was one thing about the novel that I really liked, was that it was like normal Indigenous people living in Toronto and having these different types of lives and interacting amongst themselves, and I really liked that. But overall, for me, the story it kind of lost me at points, and I didn't really get emotionally connected to the characters. Drew Hayden Taylor said that this was originally being written as a play, and I think that I could kind of feel that tension between, a play and a novel, and there was a lot of repetition, in terms of the descriptions of the characters, which I didn't think was necessary, because once you said it once or twice, why do you need to say it 3 or 4 or 5 times? And I think that was kind of a weakness of the novel for me. But it was, I'm glad I read it. I hadn't heard of Drew Hayden Taylor before, so I'm glad that I became aware of another Indigenous author in Canada. Okay, so then I read The Safekeep by Yael van der Woulden, which won the Women's Prize this year, and the Women's Prize for Fiction. And I think the story had some great selling points to it. It is again a post-World War II story. It is discussing the appropriation of Jewish homes by a non-Jewish people in Europe during, as the Nazis were extracting Jewish people to take them to camps. That is that's a pretty big part of it. Told more so from the non-Jewish perspective, and then also it's a queer story, and it's a story of being in the 1960s and realizing you're queer, but then having the tension of that being part of your reality when you're relating to your family, when you're relating to people around you. the vlog says a lot of the issues that I had with this book. I don't really understand why people loved it as much as they did. I didn't think the writing was exceptional. And I found the story very similar to Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and some of Sarah Waters' other novel, The Paying Guests, which I read as well. And I believe somewhere it was said that Yael van der Woulden was inspired by Sarah Waters' work. And so I thought, well, if you're going to be inspired by someone else's work, you gotta make it your own. And I just kept being reminded of this other style of writing. And I suppose if you haven't read Sarah Waters, then maybe this book would appeal to you in a different way. But so again, it won, but it wasn't a book that I particularly thought was exceptional. So the next one I have on here is Memory Piece by Lisa Ko. And I listened to this one on audio. And this is not a 2025, this was a 2024 release. I thought that this book had a lot of really interesting perspectives. I did not do a reading vlog on this one, but I will link the reading wrap up where I talk about it in depth. This follows three characters, three friends growing up in New York. It has a kind of post degradation of society world in New York, where the city has become, kind of military controlled. And listening to it really made me feel that it was showing a world that could really be possible. But it's also about art. I would say it's a lot about art. So if you don't like reading about art or artists or creative people, then I don't know if you would really like this one. But it's not about a painter or a sculptor. She's a performance artist, and she integrates art into her life. And so in that way, I think it's a little bit obscure. It might be a little bit alienating for someone who is not in the art world or familiar with the art world or familiar with performance art or conceptual art. So I would say, just go in there with a caveat. But it is also about tech. It's also about activism. It's also about, society and the bonds we form. There's a lot of interesting themes in the book. So I do think it's worth a read. Follow Me to Africa by Penny Ha is the next one. Now, this is a historical fiction about Mary Leakey, and I enjoyed it. It had a dual timeline between Mary Leakey's kind of historical perspective and a contemporary created character by the author named Grace, who is young and 17. There was a lot of parallels between Mary's coming of age and Grace's coming of age. And Mary and Grace become friends in Africa as they're on a dig, and they kind of bond over the protection of a cheetah, and plot ensues from there. Again, an interesting book overall, but the execution just didn't do it for me. I think it's just really important for authors to be careful about how they develop and bring in extra characters when they're writing books. Because if you're bringing them in for no particular reason, I think it often really shows in the outcome of how a character reader like myself will connect to the book. And if you don't really have a strong character that you've built, it's going to distance the reader from the story. And I think that happened with me in this case. Okay, so the next book I wanted to talk about is Cross Stitch by Jazmina Barrera, which was translated from the Spanish by Christina Sweeney. I really enjoyed this one. This was a 2023 release, I believe. And I think that this book has a lot of things to offer if you're looking at books around female friendship and coming of age in the kind of younger millennial generation. This book was about friendship, travel, craft, like this kind of connection of a craft, the connection of an activity that you do with friends over many years. And it also had a lot of lovely little vignettes about embroidery and relating embroidery to different authors, different facts about embroidery. They were just kind of sprinkled in the novel. So I did really enjoy it. Okay, so we're getting into almost my 5 stars. So Landscapes by Christine Lai was another art book, and Christine Lai is a Canadian author, and this book is set in a large estate in England, and the main character and her partner are running this kind of place where people can come and retreat and live. And it's a very it's got a really cool way of presenting the story. There's kind of this conflict between the main character and her partner's brother that kind of fuels a lot of the story, and also the relationship between the main character and her father also fuels the story. So this is also kind of a post-apocalyptic world where the environment has degraded and people are suffering because of that. And that's one of the reasons they're shutting down this big manor, because they just can't keep it going. And so they have to kind of find another way to survive. And there's a lot of art integrated into it as well, a lot of vignettes around different artists and the type of art they make and how that relates to landscape and how that relates to the self. So it's very well written, and it has a lot of really interesting ideas that you can grab onto when you're reading through it. And now we're going to hit my 5 stars. So Good Girl by Aria Aber made it to the short list of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I loved it. A lot of people didn't like this book. It was about a young woman who is living in Berlin. Her family were immigrants, and she's trying to figure out who she is and live with a lot of the anti-Muslim rhetoric that has been pushed onto her and her culture. Try to live with it, try to be just a young girl partying and like having relationships without having the pressure of her identity to separate her out from the rest of the group. But what happens is, in that she is very much denying herself and denying where she came from, and there's repercussions for that in her life. And it's about her trying to figure out who she is and how she can get to the next step in her life, while also being aware, like being able to fully embrace her identity as an immigrant living in Berlin. So it's beautiful. There's a lot of beautiful lines. I really like the writing, and I think that it does a very good job of presenting that character, of making her somebody that I cared about and somebody that I wanted to succeed. I would say it's also got about kind of toxic relationships. So she has a toxic relationship with an older man. And I think that was another thing that turned some people off, but I've read other books like that, and I thought this one did it very well. Okay, and then we have Old Soul by Susan Barker, which was just a book that compelled me to read it. I was wrapped up in the mystery of this story. A lot of people have said it's a vampire story, but it's not a vampire story. There is a supernatural entity, but I would not say that they're a vampire. So just keep that in mind. It's not your typical fangs and blood story. So, just keep that in mind. But there is a wonderful line through that you're following the bad person, and you're following these people that she's preying on, and they're trying to track her down. They're trying to stop her. But you were like, well, what is she actually doing? And there's just this really interesting line that draws you through the story, and I really loved it. It moves between different eras of time. There were just a few tiny little things that that bothered me in some of the writing, but those resolved quite quickly into the rest of the book. So I really enjoyed it. And then the top one for me was the book I just finished a few days ago, which is Menewood by Nicola Griffith. This is a sequel to Hild by Nicola Griffith. It is set in the 7th century in England. It is an adventure story about a real life woman, Hild Yiffing, who we don't know very much about, but who became an abbess later in her life. And this is a speculative idea of what she could have been like before then. And it's just such a fabulous book. The characters are amazing. The nature writing's beautiful. The world is just one that you just want to sink into and get lost in. And so, that was my number one. So, I think overall that this was a great project. I really enjoyed it. Happy to chat with you about any of these books if you have more you'd like to say about them. Like I said, I'm definitely going to continue to work to integrate newer reads into my reading more often, even if I have to wait on a waiting list, even if I end up DNFing more books potentially. But I think that keeping my reading more fresh in terms of reading more new releases was a really interesting experience. I may create a list at the beginning of 2026 as well of some books that I want to keep on my radar and try out throughout the year. And that is it for this video. Please let me know down below what your favorite 2025 release was that you read this year. I would love to add it to my TBR if it sounds like a book that I would love. And I will be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.